General Votel, while some people associate FEMA with disasters like major storms and wildfires, I know that FEMA, as well as state and local emergency managers, tries to make an all hazards approach in drills and preparation. But Congress may need to clarify federal law to reflect that all hazards approach. The Commission's first recommendation includes amending the Stafford Act to include pandemics and cyber attacks for FEMA disaster assistance. So, General, can you tell us why and what would be the practical effect of such a change?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Yes, I think the immediate response would be inclusion of pandemics or these other types of national shocks that we have been talking about would allow for a more rapid distribution and focus of resources, money, and leadership towards the problem. I think one of the things that we discovered in the process of this, because there was some initial confusion in the early days of the pandemic and looking at it as a medical issue, the government initially focused in on medically oriented organizations, Health and Human Services Department, before ultimately assigning the responsibility of this to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And in that time, valuable time was lost in focusing on the problem. So I think the key thing that this amendment does is it provides the opportunity to immediately focus on the emergency and get the necessary resources flowing towards them.
Well, thank you. General, another question. Recent events have highlighted the challenges of stocking, maintaining, and distributing emergency supplies in the Strategic National Stockpile. The Department of Health and Human Services is the lead agency when it comes to management of the Strategic National Stockpile, but should FEMA have a role in coordinating with HHS going forward?
Yes, I think they should through kind of the National Response Coordination Center. FEMA can have some ability in making sure that we have on hand the appropriate resources to deal with any of these particular emergencies. An important role that FEMA plays in this through things like the NRCC is the ability to have well-established relationships with industry and with other civil organizations out there who are providing the resources for this. So I think it is absolutely critical that they play in this particular area.
Well, thank you. I want to ask a follow-up here. How can emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence, help address these challenges? And certainly if Mr. Capps or Mr. Rogers want to add thoughts about this, that would be great.
So let me jump in here, and then I'll defer to my colleagues here. So I think one of the key things where artificial intelligence can help us is in the modeling aspect of this. This is another area where the work of the Commission identified some challenges here in trusting models that can be used to help predict what is happening. All of us are aware with hurricanes and other natural disasters, we have become very confident in the models that are used by the National Weather Service and others to predict landfalls and all that, where all that takes place, so that people can get out of the way, they can prepare, we can have the necessary resources ready to go. We are thinking about it in both time and space. And so I think one of the things that technology can help do, particularly artificial intelligence, is help fill that gap as we look at some of these other disasters. And I'll defer to Mike and others to comment.
Thank you, General, and thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I look at AI as both a defensive concern as well as a capability, right? In that we need to make sure that our data, our systems, our cloud are operational, because we can't maintain an economy or resilience without them. But then looking to what they can do for us, it's just impossible to tabletop all the scenarios with people around the table in the way that you can do with AI. So building models and then building resilient models is a real opportunity. When we were working on this commission, we thought of issues like Katrina and how difficult it is to know where are people and what needs to be where. And if you imagine, if we just simply knew where every operating IoT internet-enabled refrigerator was in Louisiana, what that could have done for us. But that's information you need to gather in advance, which is exactly what the sort of partnerships we're proposing might be able to do. Thank you.
And I assume artificial intelligence and technology can help us keep track of what we have in the National Strategic Stockpile, for example, and again, match supplies to need in a much more efficient way.
Sure. Absolutely. That's just the tracking problem. It's interesting how hard it is to know what's on what truck and where. But that's the sort of thing that, again, with IT modernization efforts across government and partnering with private enterprise, it's the sort of thing we could do. And having a real situational picture is the first step towards prioritizing response.
Great. Ms. Rogers, do you want to add? I wanted to also add about data collection and analysis in terms of identifying where distribution needs are the greatest. So if you wanted to address that, or just generally the use of other technologies, that would be helpful.
I do. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, again for the opportunity to speak today and the recognition for this important issue. I'll take a bit of what General Votel said in regards to the Commission's recommendation to create, or actually I would say transform, evolve FEMA's National Response Coordination Center and make it a permanent state-of-the-art organization that could be an interagency organization, meaning it could coordinate or should coordinate directly with the Strategic National Stockpile, with HHS, CDC, FDA, and BARDA all within it. But we need one organization that is responsible for the preparedness planning and response. And that is important to deliver consistent information on supply demand to the private sector. A lot of companies stepped up and wanted to help, but weaknesses in supply and demand signaling by the federal government and the lack of a coordinated, consistent voice by the government to the private sector really hampered the production and the delivery of much needed PPE, medical equipment, and pharmaceuticals. If the Surge Center, as we are recommending for FEMA, could also be housed in the National Response Coordination Center, and it would be state of the art, completely digitalized, allowing the secure sharing of information between the government and private sector. And it would allow a clear demand signal to be provided to the government so companies would know what they needed to ramp up in production, when to deliver, and where to deliver.
Well, thank you. And before I turn it over to Senator Hawley, I just wanted to ask Mr. Fugate, since we got into some of his expertise, area of expertise, whether he has anything to add on this particular topic.
No, again, Madam Chair, with talking about AI, talking about data, this always goes back to the question that we also talk about in the report is we have to have production capacity within the United States when we're dealing with global threats. One of our big challenges in supply chain is even knowing where stuff is. If it isn't being produced in the U.S., we may not be able to get it fast enough.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Senator Rosen. I'm going to go ahead and start a second round of questions, and I think we may have one other senator who wants to do the same after I finish my second round. So I think the first thing I want to ask is, in this last set of questions, General Votel, you and the panel have been asked generally about supply chain. I want to drill down on that a little bit and just give you all an opportunity to add anything you haven't said and then move on to a couple other topics. So early in the pandemic, the supply chain issues regarding certain items needed amid the pandemic reinforced what many of us already knew, that the United States was overly reliant on Chinese manufactured goods. So General Votel, how can we reduce U.S. reliance on Chinese goods before or during the next national crisis?
Well, certainly this is something that the Commission looked at, as you know, Madam Chair. I think the answer is, I think, lies in making the deliberate decisions about where we are getting our supplies from, and understanding exactly what the supply chains are. The idea that we talked about within the commission is the idea of right shoring, that there are some dependencies that we do have overseas that are okay to maintain. Obviously, there's real concerns with China, but we also are very dependent on a number of our other international partners for these things who are fairly reliable in terms of delivering supplies to us. So I think it is absolutely critical to understand where our supply chains lead us, and what we need to have on hand to address the initial response to these types of emergencies.
Well, thank you. Ms. Rogers, you addressed this at a certain level, and so did you, General Votel, but we obviously need to know where our critical assets are in the supply chain during an emergency. So we also acknowledged, and you've testified about the high levels of stress that the pandemic put on different parts of several supply chains. So I'll start with you, General, and then the rest of the panelists can add if they would like to. How can we improve the government's visibility into the nation's supply chains? You've all talked about it a little bit, but I just want to give you a chance to expand on it if you'd like to.
Yeah, one of the recommendations that we make is the establishment of a national disaster app that is kind of an opt-in ability that gives people, particularly private sector, really all stakeholders, civil society as well, an opportunity to see how a crisis is developing, what the future looks like for that, and then the ability to share data with government partners here to understand where supplies may be and how they may be applied to the situation. As a military man, in looking at this, the development of a common operating picture of how we are looking at the crisis is absolutely essential in this. And this is absolutely critical when it comes to both maintenance of our supplies and surge capacity, which essentially is getting the right tools to the right place at the right time. And so the establishment of a common operating picture through a redesigned National Response Coordination Center, the establishment of an app to which stakeholders can opt in, I think are two very, very critical recommendations that the Commission makes that will help go a long way towards this.
Great, thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to add anything?
Sure, I will. Just briefly, I think with this newly redesigned National Response Coordination Center, whether it is within FEMA or within DHS, it needs to be one responsible, accountable body. And the first step I would say is that we do need to review and make clear to all parties what the critical goods are. What is a critical good and what are critical infrastructure, and then work backwards in that supply chain and see where the supply chain is. Right. If a large portion of the critical goods supply chain is in China, then we need to look at a strategy to reshore some of it, and that might include incentivizing some of these companies. It could be reshoring domestically, or it could actually also mean reshoring it to an allied nation. So I think that is critical, because regional diversification, whether it's regional domestically or regional amongst our allied nations, will further strengthen the resiliency of our supply chains, especially in a crisis. But I do think that a surge center or this national response coordination center needs to have sort of state-of-the-art supply chain asset mapping capability. And it could be then downloaded to a digital app. But yeah. I think one of the first steps in the preparation and planning stage is it needs to map our supply chain assets. We've not done that. We don't know where they are and where our vulnerabilities are.
Thank you. Let me quickly move to one other and maybe two other issues before I turn to Senator Ossoff, who has joined us for a first round of questions. General Votel, the Commission proposes the creation of a leadership position within the Department of Homeland Security to oversee the development of a national crisis response exercise framework. How would this build upon the existing national exercise program at FEMA?
Thank you. It's an excellent question, Madam Chair. The idea here is to put leaders in charge of our exercises and our response planning, and there's no more definitive way of doing that than actually to have somebody that is held accountable for that can work across the the organizations in the national response framework and bring them together to participate in exercises and rehearse plans that are in place, but also has the ability to compel leadership to participate in this. Oftentimes, what we see in these instances is that we have mid-level staff participating in these, but not the leaders who are going to be making decisions. And so adding leadership into this and creation of this position, I think, gives us the best ability to really focus in on this critical task that is so important for the preparation of the nation for these disasters.
So it's the right stakeholders as well as the leadership of those stakeholders.
That's exactly right. It's getting everybody, getting all the right organizations, and then getting the participation at the right level of leadership that is going to be involved in making decisions in an actual emergency.
Thank you very much. I am over my time, and I'll now recognize Senator Ossoff for his first round of questions.